Welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, where our job is to help you build visibility, professional credibility, and connection with your ideal client by putting the human at the center of innovative marketing, so you can build and strengthen an engaging, enduring relationship with your ideal clients. I'm Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm honored that you're here with me. If you haven't joined our wonderful marketing transformation community yet, go to innovabiz.co and collect your free gift as well. Do subscribe to the show and also leave a review because it helps others find us. Let's get into today's masterclass on this InnovaBuzz podcast.
The breakthrough is only half the battle. Just because you have the stellar idea doesn't mean you win. Just because you have the execution doesn't mean you win. It just means you're halfway there. The other half is communicating it to the world. Sure, I can make videos, but if I never appear on shows, how is anyone going to find out about those videos? We need to promote. We need to communicate. We need to scale our ideas in the same way, effort, and detailed approach that we used to create those ideas in the first place.
Welcome back. I hope you've had an awesome week so far. If you haven't yet listened to my recent conversations with wealth mentor Jackson Millan and with business strategy and marketing consultant Mike Moll, then please go check them out, but only after you've listened to today's conversation. I'm really excited today to have on the InnovaBuzz podcast as my guest Brenden Kumarasamy. He's the founder of MasterTalk, a YouTube channel he started to help the world master the art of public speaking and communication. He coaches purpose-driven entrepreneurs on how to master their message and share their ideas with the world. In our discussion, Brenden talked to me about why you need to have one specific presentation topic and rehearse or practice that at least 300 times. We talked about why a good presentation is like a jigsaw puzzle. And Brenden explained how asking powerful questions can give you deep insights about others and, most importantly, about yourself. Without further ado then, let's fly into the hive and get the buzz from Brenden Kumarasamy. Hi, I'm your host Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm really excited to welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast today from Montreal in Canada, Brenden Kumarasamy, who's the founder of MasterTalk, specializing in impactful public speaking. Welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, Brenden. It's a real privilege to have you here as my guest.
Pleasure is mine, Jürgen. Thanks for taking the time.
Now, where did the idea of MasterTalk come from?
Yeah, of course. That was a long one, but I'll make it short. The idea was, when I went to university, again, I used to do these things called case competitions. So think of it like professional sports, but for nerds. So while other guys my age were playing footy or rugby or cricket, I never really had a passion for that. So what I did is I used the same competitive spirit that I had in sports, and I applied them to presentations. That's how I got really good. So what happens is, over the last couple of years, I was just presenting for fun competitively. So I presented hundreds of times, coached a bunch of people. And then when I got a job in the corporate world after I graduated from university, I asked myself a simple question, which is, how do I make a difference in the world? How do I add more value to the people around me? And that's where the idea for MasterTalk came, because I noticed that a lot of the communication information was horrifyingly bad. So I started making videos in my basement. One thing led to another, and here we are today.
Yeah, I love it. All right. So the case competition's a little bit like Toastmasters, or different?
Yeah, so there's some similarities, but a good way of thinking about case competitions, it's like Toastmasters for professionals. So Toastmaster is a great organization, and I highly recommend it for anyone who's listening because it's very inexpensive, and there's usually a club in every city in the world. But for case competitions, the environment's very different. So in a Toastmasters club, you might be presenting to other people in your city, locals, but in cases, you're presenting to executives of companies. Right? So you're 20 years old, you're 21 years old, a business gives you a problem. And a lot of schools from Europe actually fly out to Montreal every year to give PowerPoint presentations. It's crazy, really. And you're presenting sometimes to the actual CEO of the company, to the executive of the company. So it's a very high stress, high pressure environment. It's also a lot of fun, kind of like professional sports in some ways. So those are probably the big differences. But the idea is you pick a business problem, you solve that problem for an actual company, and the person who has the best solution wins the competition.
Oh, right. Okay. So it's not just speaking about something that you choose. You're actually given the topic and you have to solve a problem.
You got it. You essentially read a 20-page document. You figure out what the problem is from reading that document. You make slides, financial statements, all that stuff. And by the way, you have access to zero internet. You have 3 hours to do it. And then after the 3 hours are over, you have to present your solution.
Yeah, that is very high pressure.
Yeah, it's pretty.
And how many of these would you have done?
Oh, that's the golden question. I am what we call a case competition nut. Right. The only reason, Jürgen, that I have friends in almost every country in the world is because I've competed or coached people across all of those competitions. So I myself have probably competed in 50 of these competitions when I was in university, which is a pretty high number. And for each presentation, for each competition, I practiced at least 5 to 10 times on average. So in the span of 3 years, I probably practiced 250 to 300 presentations. But that doesn't include the other teams I was coaching. So we send people to Germany, we send people to Thailand, to Serbia, to give PowerPoint presentations. So I was very obsessive about cases.
So pre-COVID, these were all in-person events?
That's correct. And then after, they all went online.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that later on. Now, one of the things I noticed in your LinkedIn profile is you're a business transformation consultant with IBM. So I'm curious a little bit as to, and tell us what you can about that. Obviously, there might be secrecy involved there, but tell us what that means. And what particularly excites me is that word transformation, because I use that quite a lot in my marketing.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that you can think about my role at IBM is most people that tie this back with case competitions, most people that compete in those competitions get jobs at companies like IBM. That's the main reason we compete, because a lot of these companies sponsor the competition so they can pick the students that they want to hire. And that's what happens with a lot of people through the program. It's just, for me, it turned into this weird obsession where I just ended up loving this weird competition environment. So essentially what at IBM I do is I help a lot of my clients navigate their technology solution. So let's say they want to implement a new system. Let's say they want to do something with the company. They come to us and they say, what do you think? How do you think we should approach this? How do you think we could move forward to achieve this goal? That's one way of thinking about it. But the what's interesting is my whole university career was to get that job. It was not to be a YouTuber. It wasn't to be this, let me get on what's a podcast? I don't even know what that is. But then it's after I got the job that I started thinking a lot more philanthropic. And I said, hey, I'm successful now. I've achieved what I wanted to achieve. I'm going to be an executive of this company if I work there long enough. But what can I do for the world now? And unintentionally, the weird consequence of doing all these competitions, Jürgen, is I ended up becoming the youngest professional speech coach without knowing it. It was really weird.
Yeah. All right. And so MasterTalk is kind of your way of giving back to the world, and you're still pursuing your corporate career as your primary way of generating revenue for your lifestyle.
Right. So it's
right?
good. Yeah, you pretty much nailed it, Jürgen. What's interesting is the MasterTalk has evolved a lot. So at the beginning it was, I can't make this a business. It's just me in a basement. I'm just making videos. I'm going to stay at IBM. But then over time, as MasterTalk accumulated more and more success, and people wanted me to coach them for money, I said, wait, what's happening over here? When that started happening, then MasterTalk started developing a lot more revenue. So now I probably have a hard decision to make, which is what I want to do with my life, which I'm still figuring out. But I do know that one day I'll probably end up going full time with MasterTalk.
Okay. Well, it's fascinating, and I admire I love that you're very conscious about, hey, I've got a job that I love doing. I'm making a difference. In fact, that was what I set out to do. And now this other thing's taking off. So you transition at a time that suits you and works for your lifestyle. So unlike a lot of other people that kind of cast the ship off the jetty into the unknown of the big ocean, and they have this business, and so they're reliant on that business succeeding and giving them the revenue that they need, but they've basically burnt the bridge back to what was providing their income beforehand.
Absolutely, yeah, that's definitely not my style.
All right. Now, you probably get a lot of death by PowerPoint presentations in the corporate world, or have you managed to clean that out of IBM yet?
Oh no, that's an impossible task. We'll have to get some other guest on to teach us how to do that. But the way that I think about it is, how can we use our ideas to help the people who are meant to be the next geniuses of our society? Like, you know what I find crazy again, and that's the thesis behind MasterTalk in many ways, is Elon Musk didn't grow up watching me. You know, like someone like Elon is doing so many great things in society. I wish he was a much better communicator. He doesn't need to be. I mean, he's very successful. I don't have any negative feedback to give the guy. But I mean, the people who are meant to make a difference in the world, especially before they have their first exit, before they actually accumulate success, I want to make sure that those people have the resources to learn how to speak, to share ideas that matter to people who need to hear them, way before they actually accumulate success.
Yeah, I love it. Now, there's a couple of things to unpack there. And the first one is, there's two kinds of people, I guess, I see that, three kinds. There's the master communicators, but the two kinds I'm thinking of are the ones that believe that they're afraid of speaking in public or presenting in front of an audience, and the ones that are not afraid of it, but are just not good at it and need to be coached in improving. So let's tackle the people who might be afraid first. So what's the biggest issue there, and how do you address that?
Right, absolutely. So the first thing we need to realize about the fear of public speaking, again, is the following. The fear of public speaking is not our fault. The reason we're all scared of public speaking is because most of the presentations we give in our lives are mandatory. We don't wake up one morning and go, "Hey, Jürgen, you want to get breakfast and present all day?" Says nobody. Nobody says that. So when you're in school, high school, university, college, work, it's always the same drill. You're always presenting topics you don't care about, to students who don't want to listen to you, to teachers who don't have time to coach you. And this behavior gets repeated so many times in our lives that we believe that public speaking is a chore. Of course I'm scared of it. It's a chore. It's like doing the dishes. I don't want to do them. So we get trained to believe that it's a bad thing. So how do we fix it? The way that we fix public speaking is by understanding, is by understanding the following. The fear will always be there, right? I'm a professional speaker. I'm still scared of public speaking. It's still something I talk about a lot. But the difference is that the fear never gets in the way of the presentation. Why? Because the message is more important than the fear. One way of thinking about this is, if your fear and your message were in a boxing match together, fear is always going to be in the ring. You're always going to fight against it, but you need to make sure that your message gets the knockout punch every single time. That is how I want people to think about it. And I'm a great example of this. I started MasterTalk when I was 22, and I started coaching senior level executives of companies when I was 23, so people double, sometimes even triple my age. Why do they trust me with their transformation? What gives me the confidence to say, I can do this, I can teach people how to communicate properly, even if they have a lot more experience than I do? It's by understanding the following. Yeah, sure, I'm scared, but I have a belief system. I believe something about the world that is so important, that is so crucial, to the evolution of the human race, which is free communication access for everybody, that I need those executive clients so I can make the money that I need to make the videos that everyone can watch for free. So it's not this, oh, let me drink water in the morning. No. It's by saying that, yes, I'm scared. Yes, do I have a lot of insecurity when I used to coach executives? Absolutely. But it's also by understanding that by getting through that, I can create resources for the world. And that means my fear is worth losing to the message for.
Yeah, I love that. It's a great analogy. And it's all about being so focused on the service you're providing and being confident in that service, and coming back to that word transformation, in the transformation you can bring about in your clients, that the fear, because the fear is just about you, isn't it? Like my fear to go on stage is just about me, whereas what I have to offer that audience is about them.
I completely agree, and I can give you thousands of examples, literally, but I'll give you a couple off the top of my head. One of them is Brene Brown. I mean, she is the queen of vulnerability in the world. She's an extremely successful speaker and author and thought leader, and she hates public speaking. She's very public about this. She never wanted to be on a TED stage. She was a PhD in social work, spent all her life doing research in numbers and crunching, and what did she realize? Most people won't take the time to read or research her papers. Most people won't read her books. They either can't afford a book or they just don't have the time to invest in a book, which leaves Brene Brown with two options. And this option is true with me and everyone else, you and everyone else. Option one is just saying, I'm just going to serve my audience in the way I want them to, which is not the option she chose. Option two is saying, okay, I'm going to speak on this TED stage so that people who can't afford me, who can't get my books, who can't read my research papers, maybe they're a single mother with 7 children or something, they just don't have time to commit to that. They can at least watch that 20-minute YouTube video on TED. And let's hope that video inspires her to do something. And I'm sure there's a bunch of people who are inspired by that TED Talk who weren't even in that room. And that's the point I'm driving. Every great speaker has that reason. And Tony Robbins, too. He's been giving seminars for 40 years. He's obviously not doing it for the money anymore. He has a lot of money. There's no point now. He's doing it for the impact.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important word, the impact. So coming back to the second category that I mentioned at the beginning of that conversation, because I think that ties in with the impact. So the person that believes they're comfortable speaking but are actually a really poor speaker or presenter. They're boring, they're not inspiring, even though they've got fabulous content, they've got fabulous expertise, they actually have something that's of value to their audience, but they generally end up boring their audience, putting them to sleep or turning them away.
Right.
How do you address them?
I love the way you broke it down also, again, it's super interesting. But here's the way I think about it. There's a couple of tactics that you can implement that will 10x your presentation, and I'll give you the number one. The number one tactic is that the reason most people are boring and not engaging is because they always present different presentations. People come up to me again, they go, Brenden, how do I get people more engaging? I'm so boring as a speaker. And I always ask them the same question. How many times have you given your presentation? They go, once, twice.
Yeah.
I go, okay, what else do you expect? If you tried to make caviar or lobster or something really hard the first or second time, you think it's going to taste like how a chef would make it? You go like, well, I guess not. Well, exactly. It's the same analogy. I've presented my keynote 350 times. And that's nothing compared to how many times Tony has done his stuff. Same thing with my podcast shows, my appearances. The first time I was on a show and someone like yourself would go, so tell me about MasterTalk. I'm just like, well, I guess MasterTalk is something for my mother. I'm not really sure. And then over time, the way that I communicate that single idea improves dramatically because I'm always focused on one idea. So the secret is pick one topic that you're going to present for a long time. Because I get this question a lot, oh, Brenden, yeah, that's great and everything, but I work at a bank. What am I supposed to do that's repeatable? The logic that they're missing again is, what do you do outside of work? What's something that you really care about? Is it recipes? Is it running a marathon? Are you coaching a sports team, a little leagues team, like a baseball team or a rugby team or a footy team, or just a leadership program? If you find that one thing, you could present that 100 times. It's all about picking the right topic. And for you, Yogan, the topic is simple. It's your own podcast. You want to promote your podcast to different people in your city, to different organizations. You have to always present it all the time. The content isn't going to change. Only your audience will change. So that's a good example of a repeatable topic. Second thing I'd recommend, the puzzle method. Public speaking, again, is like a puzzle. You know those jigsaw puzzles you gotta put together with your family? Yeah. So if I asked you again, if you're working on this puzzle yourself, which pieces would you start with first and why?
Yeah. I'd start with the corner pieces because that kind of gives you the boundaries, and then build from the corner pieces, build the edges.
Absolutely. I completely agree. But the thing is we need to realize is why don't we do that in public speaking? Right? We have a business presentation, we have a work-related presentation, a school presentation. So what do? We shove a bunch of content in our presentations. We start with the middle pieces first. So when we get to the end of that presentation, we get to the last slide, and we look at the crowd and go, thanks. That's probably 95% of the presentations I've seen in my life. So how do we fix that? We fix that by understanding the following. Like you said, when we start a puzzle, we start with the edges first. We need to do that in public speaking too. Present your introduction 50 times, not 3 times, not 5 times, 50 times. It'll actually only take you an hour. It's not that hard. Same thing with the conclusion. What's a great movie with the terrible ending? A terrible movie. 50 times. In 2 hours of practice, you'll have already changed your entire communication ability. You look at your presentation, you're like, wow, I'm really good at this introduction, this conclusion. I'm a pretty good speaker. That's all you need. Then you use the confidence and you tackle the middle. But much like a puzzle, who does puzzles on their own? Nobody, right? Do it with a friend, do it with family, do it with people who want to work on their communication skills and master the puzzle. And also, I would love to add, you are an amazing example of this too, right? The first time you did an introduction, you probably weren't that good at it. You're like, Brenden is something. Is he on Twitter? I'm not really sure. And then after 50 times or 25 times or 20 times, you're a lot more confident in the way that you intro. So same thing.
Yeah. Well, the confidence part certainly is a big thing. And if you know the tactics and bringing that in, that makes a big difference. And I love the idea. I mean, one of the key points here going through both of those recommendations is repetition and just really practicing that. And I know, we're at, I think we're at about 376 episode of this show. Now, I don't have the number in front of me right now, but by the time the listener is hearing this, they'll know which episode it is. And if you go back to episode 1 and episode 10, let's say, and listen into that, my whole approach to podcasting was a lot less polished than it is now. And that comes about by repetition.
And by the way, guilty as charged. My old videos are still up for a reason. You can see me in my mother's basement just going that look like this. Hi everyone. My name is, and I'm sitting there like, why am I doing this video? I look really stupid. And then 18 months later, it's, did you know that 57% that I get into my master stuff? Yeah. Great.
All right. Well, there was one other thing that I really liked about the puzzle analogy, and that was the idea, and I wonder if you could talk to this a little bit, the idea, because you talked about having one topic that you talk about, but then let's say you're doing a workshop that goes over a bunch of days, and there's lots of different topics there. Now, there's an umbrella topic, and there's a whole lot of little subtopics underneath that, but essentially you're doing maybe 50 different presentations during that day. But depending on how the workshop is going and how the participants are responding, those presentations will change on the fly. So you're not going to deliver, at least if you're a good coach or a good trainer, you're not going to deliver, here's what I've practiced, and it's going to be like this regardless of what's going on in the environment, in the audience, or the feedback I'm getting. So the puzzle analogy to me is kind of how can you build little bits and pieces that you throw together on the fly. So you've got these little modules that you rehearse and have down pat and put them together. Is that an approach that you endorse, and how would you go about that?
Right. So here's the way I think about it, Jürgen. Even if you're giving a 3-day workshop, my assumption that I like to drive, that I recommend people to start with, is even if your topics change, your overarching theme doesn't. So let's say when I give corporate workshops to clients of mine, let's say at a company, yeah, sure, day 1 would be how do you gauge your audience? Day 2 would be how do you structure a presentation? Day 3 would be something else. But the overarching theme remains the same, which is communication. And I'd even argue my entire life's work, my entire intention for me showing up on a show like this is in one sentence, which is convince you that you can master communication. If I achieve that one key idea, it's over. You'll rewatch this episode, you'll follow me on YouTube, you'll watch all my free stuff, you go on Instagram, you'll watch all my free stuff there, you'll do coaching, you'll go to Toastmasters, you'll take action if I convince you. If I don't convince you, you won't do any of those things. So even regardless of how long or complex the ideas are, all of the experts in what they do can simmer it down to one sentence. Once again, I'll give one other example here. Tony Robbins, great analogy. He's probably read every single book on NLP in the world, probably, because he's been doing it for 40 years. But when he gives presentation, he's not spewing all that knowledge onto you for like 16 hours. Yeah, sure, he gives a lot of info, but at the end of the day, he's trying to convince you of one thing, to shock you into believing that you could do whatever it is you want to do. And if he achieves that, you'll do whatever you want. You'll do whatever he wants you to do, whether it's buy his programs, invest in his coaching, go take action on the thing, and then recommend him as a speaker to other organizations. So the way that I think about it is puzzle applies nonetheless. How do you start every single day of your workshop? What intention are you starting? How are you beginning that? How are you closing this presentation? And then as you're tackling the middle, you figure it out. But obviously as the presentation gets longer, then the ideas just get a bit more complicated. But I would argue the structure remains the same if you want people to remember what you're saying in those 3 days.
Yeah, that's great advice. I love that outline. And in particular, I mean, you said something there that I think is probably worth emphasizing some more, and that's the intention. What's the intention of this day? What's the intention of this segment? What's the intention of this presentation? And then coming back to what you said, the vision, the overarching vision, if you could distill that down to one point. So for me, I mean, I talk about let's make marketing human again, and I've started doing some connection events and networking anti-networking events in a way, because they're about making networking human again. So it's all this kind of, the building relationships with people to actually create some magic or create whatever it might be. So yeah, having that vision is so important, isn't it?
I absolutely agree with you. And I love that tagline, by the way. Really good.
Okay, now one of the things that we touched on briefly earlier was the pandemic and how all these live events are transitioning to virtual. So what advice do you have for people as they, let's say they're reasonably confident of going on stage to present in front of a live audience? Let's say they're really good at that. Let's say they get a lot of energy and derive a lot of or actually gear their presentation around the feedback that they're getting from the audience at any given time. And by feedback, when I say that, I mean the verbal cues, the non-verbal cues, the body language, whether people are falling asleep or not. So not people actually telling them, hey, it's good or it's not good. It's actually all the subtle cues that they're getting, and they're really good at that. How do they transition to an online presentation that gives them the energy that they normally get from that in-person one? And also, what other adjustments do they need to make in the online space?
Absolutely. So a good way of simmering this down, Jürgen, is by understanding the following. The difference between an online presentation and an offline one is that in the online world, we cannot gauge how our audience reacts to us. So I'll give you an example. Let's say, I'm giving a workshop near you in person and I say a joke. Two things are going to happen. Number one, you either laugh at the joke and you go, wow, Brendan's such a funny guy. Or B, which is more likely, you'll look at me and say, man, this guy, not funny. Why is he saying jokes? But what's great about in person is I can see that on your face. I can see you, I can see everyone around you and say, okay, I am not a funny person. Maybe I should adapt. I don't have that luxury in the online world. The same joke that I said with the same amount of enthusiasm, the same amount of positivity, the same amount of energy, I need to assume it's funny. If you're on a Zoom call with 20 people and all of their cameras are off, I don't know if they're laughing. Even in this very conversation we're having right now, we're one-on-one. I don't really know how you're reacting to me. Why? Because I'm not looking at you. I'm looking at the camera lens, right? So to give you the illusion that I'm looking at you directly, which is bizarre. So what are the tips now that we understand that context? Number one, picture the perfect audience. Speak to one person, that crowd that you actually do know. Have a conversation with them and understand why your presentation matters. Number two is put a picture of somebody that you love, or like a fruit or a food, next to your camera, right? Your lens. So you're always looking at the camera lens. That's something you can do that's super easy. And then number three is understand that your audience always has positive intentions. This is not something you'll get overnight. This is something you'll get over time. That's what I mean by that. When I was on my first show, like this type of show, it was very nerve-wracking for me because it's essentially a stranger asking you questions about your life. And you're just there like, yeah, who's this guy? But then over time, at the end of every show, people go, wow, Brenden, that was really good, or that was really bad. But either way, you get some feedback. You start to realize that, wait a second, these people are really great. So the perception of your audience changes very rapidly, especially if you're very clear on the ideas you want to share with people. So it goes very quickly from, who's this Jürgen guy? What's this podcast about? To, wow, look at all the podcast episodes he's doing, all the value he's adding. He's trying to make marketing human again and networking human again. I'm going to assume that I've known him for 5 years. And I'm going to speak to him as if that is the case. That is something that you learn over time with your presentations. But eventually, as you keep talking to your audience and getting feedback from them, that belief system eventually becomes true.
Yeah, that's a great mindset hack there in terms of, and I'm trying to look at my camera now because you've kind of called me out.
It's okay. This is audio anyways.
Yeah, that's right. But I am watching your response so that I know when I can jump in and I'm not interrupting you. That's what I typically do with my guests, but I guess I need to step back and learn to expand my vision a bit. But the idea of having the mindset of these people have good intent for me, and as long as I provide value to them, then it's probably going to be good. And I guess what are some of the things you do, given that you can't read the body language or, people rolling their eyes or whether they're laughing at your jokes? What are some of the things you can do to kind of get people engaged in an online environment?
Yeah. A lot of people ask me for hacks, for tricks, and I won't give the shortcut because there isn't any. Here's the real shortcut. Present it so many times that you're more confident, or so confident that it won't fail, right? The reason I present well online is not because I'm special. It's because I've delivered the same keynote over and over and over again. That is where confidence comes from. It comes from the understanding that you can ace one presentation, and then the skills that you get from that one presentation, you start to apply to everything else in your life. And every conversation you have, every presentation you give, same rationale here. There's no ball you can start throwing up in the air that's going to get people's attention in a presentation. Be so good at communicating that one singular idea that you become unstoppable. Once again, I'll use myself as an example. When I started MasterTalk, I didn't have the idea for the puzzle analogy. I used to explain speech structure in a very academic, boring way. I used to say, "Oh well, Jurgen, you got your key idea, main idea, defend." I've already lost people. Like this is I can't do this. He's too good at public speaking. I don't want to learn from him. Right, and that doesn't help my audience. But then I was coaching a client. This was 9 months ago, and she wasn't understanding my speech structure. Even if I was explaining it really slowly, I think she was tired that day or something. And she was an executive of the company. And I just said, how can I explain this easily? And I just looked in my basement. I saw like a puzzle somewhere. And I just said, actually, when I think about it, public seems like a puzzle. And she goes, oh, really? How? And I go, well, it's like edges. You know how you do the edges first? And then she goes, oh, that makes so much sense to me. And I go, wait a second. And then I wrote it down on my notepad for all my YouTube ideas. I made a video on it that's coming out in like 2 years or something. But after I wrote the blog and I read it, I said, I have to use this for my podcast appearances. So even my ideas are always evolving over time. And that's the key, is to fall in love with that process and see your audience getting mind blown. Like, I always love it. It never gets old for me, even if I do a lot of shows, as you probably know. Like, when I look at your face and you go, whoa, this puzzle thing is like incredible. I go, yes.
Cool, yeah.
That's working, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it brings up the idea or the concept that if you use metaphors to explain things or stories and both, that it really can hammer home a point and get people to understand something that perhaps they didn't understand before when you were kind of breaking it down into an academic framework or a structure, or trying to justify this is why you do it this way. And yet if you bring that metaphor in, it's all of a sudden, oh, yeah.
Right. I find that such a gift. Like, if I think about your space, I mean, Seth Godin is a personal hero of mine. You know, I binge his podcast. I've like, his book came out 2 weeks ago. I already read it like 2 days after it came out.
Oh, you're a bit ahead of me. I've just bought it on order.
It's good. You already know it's good. You don't even need to read it.
Yeah.
Right, but what's great about Seth is the way that he simmers down very complex ideas of marketing in a way like a 5-year-old can understand it. Right, this whole idea that marketing is always about culture. I'm always like, oh, I didn't think of it that way. So I think people who try to do that are real gifts to society. We need more people like that who aren't afraid to use weird, bizarre analogies to explain something that actually helps people. That, by the way, as a side note, that's why I'm frustrated with my entire industry. You know, when I started MasterTalk, my coaching practice and my YouTube channel, all that stuff, I looked at everyone and I was like, what are you all doing? Like, you're explaining things really academically. Yeah, who cares if you have a PhD? Like, if people aren't sharing their ideas, then what does it matter? So I started changing my tune there.
All right. One other question I had in terms of presenting a speech or presenting a presentation and rehearsing that, do you script it?
Depends. That's the short answer. So in the case of YouTube, I script all my videos. The reason is simple. In a video context, I can't clarify. Like, you can't ask me a question in the middle of the video. So I need to make sure it's so clear that everything's structured and it flows really well. So in that case, I always structure. Same thing with really short speeches. If you have 2 minutes to give a talk, I highly recommend you script every word, you memorize every word. Memorize is just a strong word. I wouldn't necessarily say memorize. I would say know exactly what you're talking about because you don't have a lot of time. But that's a very small percentage of most presentations. Most presentations are 10, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour. So I wouldn't memorize in those cases, and I wouldn't script either for very long presentations. I would just make an outline. What do I want to talk about? Why do I want to talk about those things? And then over time, especially if you always present the same thing, you'll start to refine that curriculum. In the same way, Tony Robbins has, revamped Unleash the Power Within for 40 years, and Date with Destiny as well. I think he's been doing that for 30 years or something. Right? It starts as a 5-day event. He doesn't really know what he's doing. But then after a couple of years go by, he goes, this is working really well. This isn't. And then he tweaks it. Now it's the amazing product it is today.
All right. Well, that's great advice. Okay, well, this is fascinating. I could go on speaking for ages, but I'm aware of the time, and I think it's a good point now to move on to the Buzz, which is our innovation round, and it's designed to help our leaders or our listeners who are primarily innovators and leaders in their field with some tips from your experience. So I have 5 questions, and hopefully you'll give us some really insightful tips that'll inspire the listener to go and do something awesome today as a result. So
Happy to. Let's do it.
What do you think the number one thing is anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
Yes. Ask yourself hard questions. I've always believed in this idea that the quality of your life is solely determined by the quality of the questions that you ask yourself. And that's from Tony Robbins. And the reason why I believe that's so important is the following. All great insights, as Peter Thiel, who's the founder of PayPal, puts it best, all stem from controversy, secrets that very few people believe, that most people think is BS. It's like if I told you 10 years ago, Jürgen, here's what you're going to do on your next vacation. You're going to sleep at a stranger's house and pay them money for it.
Yeah.
So this guy is crazy. What's he doing in his basement talking to me on this podcast? He's out of his mind. And that's also Airbnb. That's going public next month, right? And then there's, oh, by the way, Jürgen, you're going to take your nephew and put them in a stranger's car instead of giving them your own car to drive. Once again, you would know, like, this guy's nuts. But today, that's Uber. A lot of wealthy families would rather give their kids unlimited Uber than buy them a car because they might get intoxicated at a party. It's a lot safer for them. That's the point I'm driving. The number one thing that you can do for innovation, to be more innovative, is to ask yourself one hard question every day. What are you pretending not to know? If you had all the money in the world, how would you spend your time? And what is the one truth that you believe in that most people think isn't true?
Yeah, I love it. I've been reading quite a lot of books about questions and really getting into that idea of asking powerful questions. And I'm just trying to think of the title of this book. It's by Will Wise and Chad Littlefield. I think it's called Ask Powerful Questions, but it's quite amazing. So you reminded me of that. But they talk about the whole range of things, creating relationships through asking better questions, creating relationship with yourself, really digging in and understanding problems through asking better questions. So the whole gamut, and they give lots of great examples there. So I love your answer to that.
Of course.
Great. Okay, now what's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas?
I always like saying things people don't say. So I have this mantra that I follow, which is be insane or be the same. I think it's really cultivating my own insanity that has made me very effective at creating and innovating on new things. So I'll give you an example. I'm a very bizarre character, right? I started a YouTube channel on public speaking communication tips at the age of 22. And then after that, I started coaching executives of companies at the age of 23. But I also still live in my mother's basement. I don't own a car. I'm literally talking to on a mattress, Jürgen, right? I can leave. I can go buy a really big house, all this stuff. I don't do any of those things. I also dance alone in my basement for an hour a day. And I can karaoke in 8 different languages. All of these things seem childish, right? You're listening like, why is he telling me all this? Let me tell you why this is important. Because I'm so comfortable in my skin and I question everything, right? Why are we saving up for retirement if Steve Jobs died at 56? He had all the best doctors in the world. Kobe Bryant died at 41. None of this makes any sense. And once you realize that nothing makes sense, the only thing left to do is to make sense of it yourself, to make your own rules. Once you realize that all the rules are made up. But if you never get there first, you're never going to get the cool insight. Maybe you're a banker right now and as an executive, and you start to be more insane. You start to tell people about your love for cupcakes, and you realize, wait a second, I have the best cupcake recipe in the world. Why am I working at a bank? Right? But you don't get to those insights. So I think for me, it's all about making a list of all of the weird things that you do and communicating that. I guarantee you 95% of the people who are listening right now aren't willing to do that. And I think if you do, it'll add a lot of value to your life because you'll find out who your real friends are and what you're actually supposed to do in life.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of great messages in that. So thanks for sharing that, and thanks for sharing your list with us, essentially.
Of course, yeah.
Now, what's a favorite resource that you use most often?
Resource. Let me just make sure I knock out this question. So would that be a book, or is that an app, or it could really be anything I wanted to?
It could be anything you want it to be.
Okay, so I'll recommend my favorite book then. My favorite book of all time, especially for the impact people out there, is Thirst by Scott Harrison. Scott Harrison is the person I admire the most in the world. He's the CEO of Charity Water. It's a nonprofit he started to help the world gain access to clean drinking water. But I think what I love the most about Scott is the way that he's applied storytelling, personal branding, and messaging in the way that he sold his charity and the cause behind it. So he used to be a nightclub promoter in New York City. He used to sell bottles of champagne for $500 to a lot of wealthy people. And he uses a lot of those same marketing strategies and applies them into philanthropy. I think he's the best case on how to use your ideas to make a difference in the world. And he's also just an amazing human being, so I highly recommend his book.
All right, well, that's great. Well, I'm not familiar with that, so I'll have to add that to my reading list, and we'll certainly post a link to it in the show notes as well.
Of course.
Now, what's the best way to keep your clients on track?
Oh, that's interesting. What's the best way to keep my clients on track? So many things. So many things I probably shouldn't mention on a show because people won't like me if I say those things. But I would say the biggest one is to always remind them why they started. For example, let's say I'm talking to a client and they're ready to give up on their communication. They're like, Brenden, I've been trying this for 20 years. I don't want to do it. I always ask them this question. And the question is, how would the world change if you were an incredible speaker? How would the world be different if you had an incredible message? So the way this translates to a lot of people who are listening right now who are purpose-driven entrepreneurs, Jürgen, as you probably know, it's your show, is the idea that they have an idea we're sharing. They have a product, a service, this movement, but they're scared of public speaking. So what they need to get clear on is what happens if they weren't afraid of public speaking. They could share their products, their services, their love for what they do with millions of people. Because this is what people need to understand, that I tell my clients to understand, that Gary Tan talks a lot about, is this idea that the breakthrough is only half the battle. Just because you have the stellar idea doesn't mean you win. Just because you have the execution doesn't mean you win. It just means you're halfway there. The other half is communicating it to the world. Sure, I can make videos, but if I never appear on shows, how is anyone going to find out about those videos? We need to promote. We need to communicate. We need to scale our ideas in the same way, effort, and detailed approach that we used to create those ideas in the first place.
Yeah, I love that answer. And I particularly love your quote about how would the world change if you were an incredible speaker. And I think that talks to a lot of the fears that people have, whether it's speaking, whether it's presenting, whether it's doing their marketing, whether it's promoting themselves and what they do. But if they take the approach of, hey, what I have to give will change the world, then keep that front and center.
Oh, yeah. And one thing I always like to push for people who are like, oh, I don't want to be a keynote speaker. I don't want to be a YouTuber like you, Brenden, or a very successful podcaster like yourself, Jürgen. What I always reply with is you need to understand communication has very little to do with just public speaking or what you're doing. It's everything. It's the conversation you have with your loved ones. It's the way that you communicate to your family. It's the way that you get dinner with your friends. It's every interaction that you have. So for you, the reason to master communication doesn't even need to be your product or your business. It could simply be, hey, I always argue with my wife all the time. But if I knew how to communicate properly, a lot of those fights would just go away.
Yeah, that's right. It's all pervasive, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Right across life. All right. And finally, what's the number one thing anyone can do to differentiate themselves?
Right. Here's something I was telling a friend this morning, actually, so I'm happy to share. Your unique gifts, I'll repeat it twice. Your unique gift is the sum of all of the qualities that make, all the sum of all the qualities that an average human being would find insane. So let me repeat that again. Your unique gift is the sum of all of the qualities that you have that an average human being would find insane. It's not the fact that I'm a YouTuber that makes me different. It's not the fact that I can karaoke in 8 languages. It's not the fact that I can dance for for so much time in my basement. It's not the fact that I make generous YouTube videos and talk like this. It's all of the above. It's because I do all of those things. Because I dance, I can make a video on the relationship between dance and public speaking. It's because I karaoke that I can make the analogy between, hey, the best way to practice pronunciation is to practice languages that you don't know. If I sing songs in German, if I sing songs in Italian, like buongiorno, come stai, right? I start changing languages, my pronunciation in English is going to get better. It's because I do all of these weird things that makes me unique. So you need to do the same thing.
I love that. So much to add there. And I love the little formula that's embedded there. Yeah. Okay, well, thanks, Brenden. This has been absolutely fabulous. I've really enjoyed this. Now, where can people find out more about you and maybe even reach out and say thanks for what you've shared today?
Of course. Best way to get in contact with me, Jürgen, is definitely the YouTube channel. So that's MasterTalk in one word. You could just type that up on the YouTube search engine. You'll find me in all my social medias. You can contact me, no problem.
Great. And we'll make it easy by putting some links in the show notes as well. All right. Now, do you have some parting advice for our listener today?
Absolutely, man. You've asked me some really good questions today, so I'm having trouble figuring out what the parting advice is. But I would say the big thing is to understand the following. The most important habit that I really want to reiterate here is that by asking yourself a hard question about life, not only will it make you more innovative, it'll make you a completely different human being. The thing that made me different than everyone else, Jürgen, given my age and my relative success, has nothing to do with my accolades, how cool I am, or how unique. It is the level of questioning that I did to myself at a very young age. I wrote my own funeral speech when I was 20. I started asking, what would happen if, my mom died, which is why I live with my mom, because I don't know when she's going to pass. I want to spend as much time as I can with her. All that stuff is because I've questioned everything in the culturescape. The culturescape means everything in our culture, that I've been able to make decisions that only make sense to me. And that's what I want for every human being. Get a good example with this, and it's a good way to close. Your definition of happiness. What is your definition of happiness? Most people copy everyone else's. You know what mine is? Yeah. Mine is yelling at my friends at a restaurant about controversial subjects that literally bother people at the restaurant. It's clubbing for 7 hours straight. Even if I don't drink, I just like to dance a lot. And it's asking people very uncomfortable questions about their life. Like, let's say I met you at an event, at a coffee shop. I would ask you questions like this. If you were God, what would you do first and why? It's a really weird question. And most people who are listening to us are going, well, I don't want to do that, Brenden. I don't want to sing songs. I don't want to do all this stuff. And that's the point. Where's your list?
Yeah.
Make it. And then make your own rules.
Yeah. And I'll have to borrow that question because I think that's a really deep one. And,
I'll send you all of them at the end.
the answer can really give you some insights into that person, because that's about actually making a connection. So instead of saying, oh, how are you, Brenden? And your response typically will be, oh, I'm good, which doesn't tell me anything. Or you might say, well, I'm sort of okay today. I've had a hard day. Or you might say, oh, I'm really excited because, well, actually, generally you might, that if you are really excited, you might give me more. You might say because something's happened, and then I can explore further. But normally it's, I'm good. Thank you. How are you? Yeah. And there's no conversation, right? All right. Now, finally, who else should I get on this podcast and why?
Oh, definitely Scott Harrison. If I knew him personally, I would make an introduction. But I think Scott Harrison is the person you want on your show. He's the epitome of impact. He is someone that I care deeply about, and he's someone you should definitely have on the show.
All right. Well, we'll have to reach out to him. So, I'm exploring ways to reach out to these people that I don't have the personal connection to, or my guest doesn't have the personal connection to either. So, you've given me another reason to start exploring or experimenting with some of these ideas I've got to reach out to those people. So, thanks for that, Brenden. And thanks for all you've shared with us today. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your insights with us so generously. I've really enjoyed this. I hope you've had fun, and I'm looking forward to sharing this with my audience. So please stay in touch, and all the best for the future.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me, Jürgen.
I hope you enjoyed that fascinating and really informative conversation with Brenden and took something away from his episode. practice, practice, practice was a big message. Not sexy, but really effective, particularly the cornerstones of your presentation, the start and the end. I'd love to know what you took away from Brenden's episode. Leave a comment below the blog post, which you can find at innovabiz.co/Brenden Kumarasamy or innovabiz.co/Brenden K. That is BRENDENK. All lowercase, all one word, innovabiz.co/Brenden K or innovabiz.co/Brenden Kumarasamy. You'll also find contact information for getting in touch with Brenden there, as well as links to the MasterTalk website, to the YouTube channel, his social media pages, and the other resources we spoke about in today's conversation. Now, if you like this episode, please do share it with 2 other people that it might help, people that might be struggling with their public speaking. Tag me in that share, and to thank you for helping others with this fabulous content, I'll reach out to you with a special surprise. Brenden suggested that we have a conversation with Scott Harrison, author of Thirst, on a future InnovaBuzz podcast episode. So Scott, keep an eye on your inbox for an invitation from us to the InnovaBuzz podcast, courtesy of Brenden Kumarasamy. Tune in again to the next episodes of the InnovaBuzz podcast. We've got even more fantastic guests lined up, including Tendai Vicky, the author of Pirates in the Navy and associate partner at Strategizer, and also Brooke Sellis of B Squared Media and the Marketing Companion podcast. Thanks for listening to this episode. Make sure you subscribe to the show to be reminded of new episodes. It's free to subscribe. Leave a review if you like. Even if you don't like me, I'm okay with that. I'm asking you to leave a review because it helps other people find this show. Go to innovabiz.co to join our marketing transformation community and access a free gift my team and I made for you. It's the Marketing Master Mini Class. We want to give you everything you need to transform your marketing into a human-centered, relationship-focused growth engine. Until next time, I'm Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBizz. Remember, be awesome and keep innovating.